listening to 102.9 WFPRLP, Franklin Public Radio.
Read this stuff. It being close to 7.
Recording in progress.
Call tonight's meeting of the November 6th meeting of the Finance Committee to order. First order of business is to elect officers, and by virtual agreement, and because this is the 5th month of the fiscal year, and 4 members of the three officers plus one other member is a member of joint budget, and I don't want to mess that up, particularly in this year, because we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm going to make a motion that George Conley be chairperson, Natalie Riley be vice chair, and Nicole Covisario be clerk. Anybody second?
I second.
Discussion, guys, because it's not different, but if we have 2 new members and whatnot, so.
Are you sure you want to do it?
This will be the last, trust me.
No, I asked because the last conversation that we had, you were
Yeah.
pretty sure you didn't.
That
So
was it.
I want to be sure.
That was, yeah, no, we'll leave that one alone. Can I get a second?
You got one now.
Second.
Yeah.
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No? Unanimous. Second thing is we have 2 new members tonight. Chris Diaz and him.
Ken Ojuku.
Ken Ojuku, yes.
You
You
got
get the W, he tells me.
Yeah, if you pretend the W isn't there, I find that makes it a little bit easier.
I'd like to just take 5 minutes so the rest of us and the world at large can get to know them. So if you could just give your name and 20 words of what you're doing, how you got here.
Sure. Ken Ojuku, as I said, to make it easier, if you pretend the W isn't there, I do find that makes it roll off the tongue a little bit more smoothly. I have lived in Franklin for roughly 12 years. I am, and I've gotten involved with the town over the last few years, just as of trying to pay attention to what's happening from a financial perspective. I am a finance and strategy professional. My background is in, I've been an investment banker, private equity investor, and currently I do a strategy for Fidelity. Essentially, my role is typically find a problem and figure out how to fix it. So that's what I'm hoping to help to do with this town.
Thank you. And Chris Diaz on this end.
Diaz.
Diaz.
You got it. I'm Chris Diaz. I've lived in Franklin about 2 years now. My background is I'm a researcher at the UMass Donahue Institute, where I specialize in topics related to economics, public policy, and demography.
20 words, good.
I can't count.
Now we go to the part of the meeting where we invite public comment from the room, and there's no indication there's anyone here. I'm sure they'd all like to comment, but they won't. And anybody on Zoom, and I don't think there's anyone. Is there?
Linda works for us. Linda's the comptroller.
So public comments is again 0. now, approval of minutes. These are the first minutes that are, Nicole is breathing large sighs of relief. They were generated from videos, I think, or recordings of the meetings by AI to some extent.
Yeah, we're trying out a software. I do see a smile on Nicole's face. Nicole, we heard you. We wanted you to stay on the committee. We didn't want this to be the end where you walked away because of doing minutes. We thank you for all your efforts. Amy's been working with a vendor that has a AI-related software and produced these minutes. There's certainly some pros to it so far. We have found a couple of issues that we have to work out either with the company. But all in all, for Nicole's purposes and the committee, the minutes are being done without having to have somebody on the committee do them. So I'm sure that's good news. And hopefully it'll allow us to also make sure that we stay on top of them. So now we have a system upstairs where we just send the Zoom link to the consultant, they do them, they send it back, and we quality control them in the office. That's how we're able to get everybody's names in here. The staff will just go put them in. So we're still testing it out, and we've tested it out with a few other committees, and it seems to be doing pretty well. But like any new software, there's going to be a little glitches, and so I think what we'll probably see over time is as Zoom becomes a funnel for AI or Google Meets and other stuff, I'm sure at some point the evolution of the technology, I have a feeling probably sooner rather than later, all of these meetings will just be done in transcripts at some point, is my guess, which is great because it could save us a lot of time and a lot of money in the long run, so we'll have to see how that goes. But for right now, we're giving Nicole a breather, and we have 3 sets of minutes on here for your approval.
Okay. Make a motion to approve May 6th, May 8th, and May 15th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Thank you. Item 5, Town Administrator's Memo.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, through you to the FinCom, so the action tonight that's needed is to recommend the budget adjustments in the packet. The memo is I hopefully straightforward, but just for the record, we're adding in, based on the Board of Assessors pre-tax rate certification number, we're adding in $167,000 in new growth, which is very good news for the revenue sheet. We did have a lower amount of local aid than what we anticipated in the final budget in July. We get those cherry sheets usually from the state, usually in August. And so we did result in $17,680 in less in state aid than we anticipated. So if anybody out there wonders why, the Senate budget was a little higher than what was ultimately passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. We have transitioned one of the budget neutral issues from the planning department to the treasurer's office. It's a revenue neutral issue. It's just moving the oversight of the passport office from the planning office to the treasurer's office. A lot of that really just has to do with synthesis and efficiencies. Basically, people who get their passports, if any of you have, they just go to the treasurer's office, pay right at the window. So it's just much more streamlined for us to do it that way. We did add in, we just pull up the resolution here. We did deduct a little bit from the comptroller budget in salaries of $10,000. We're reducing that. And basically that's because the reforms that you're seeing up here, where we already made a budget adjustment earlier in June, part of that was from some of the savings that we anticipated through the finance reorg. Our audit services, our auditors have been bought out. And so for this year, before we can go out to bid again, we need a little bit extra money of $35,000 for our audit, which also includes, by the way, the auditing of federal ARPA funds for the municipal money. Let's see, because of the reform you also see up here, we'll talk about it a little bit. The Town Human Resources Office, we've decided that we need a part-time staff member to augment that work. We don't need a full-time staff member, so there's about $27,500 in savings there. At the request of the town clerk, who's here tonight, fantastic job, by the way, Nancy. I know everybody, I don't know if you slept, but, you know, all the comments have been really positive about the election last night. The town clerk has requested an additional staff member for her office. And then recreation, we bring in the revenue to offset those expenditures. Ryan needs a small bump of about $10,000, and Ryan's here to answer questions. The really big part of this, Mr. Chairman, is really in the employee benefits. As you can see in the memo, it's about a $103,000 increase. This is a precursor to a lot of the joint budget subcommittee meetings where we've been talking about healthcare. It's going to be a very, very expensive year. As outlined in the memo, an unexpected increase to the Aetna Medicare Advantage plan for the retirees resulted in a higher $85,000 increase in that line item. And then to make the budget even out, we're adding about another just under $20,000 into the unemployment account. As you'll notice in the year-to-date report, our unemployment line item is already pretty much used. It's already gone. And I just want to give the schools a shout out and thank you to them. Emma, who just came in somewhere, Emma, yep, raising her hand. Emma's our new benefits coordinator, and in working with the schools in the town, we've charged Emma with making sure there's one set of eyes working on unemployment to make sure we're protesting the appropriate charges, to making sure the money that's getting paid out is authentic and real, we're not being double charged. As you may know, with unemployment, these cases can be lengthy and difficult, and so we're charging one person to really oversee all of that, which should create some efficiencies. So that's the summary. Be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. So we don't have an updated control sheet, right, of FY '25, like an overall top to bottom? Where do we net at, like, so, where were we before and then where are we gonna be after? Were we balanced?
Yeah, you're balanced after this.
Okay, we're balanced after this.
Well, this is a balanced amendment.
Okay,
We've traditionally only, in the budget revision, we label out what's being changed. So if there's nothing on this list, no other department's expense or personnel items are being affected. If you're doing the math, Natalie, there might be a few dollars because, as you know, at the end of every budget year, it's not exactly at $1. So sometimes there's like an extra $100 or $300 or $1,000 after the tax levy in any fiscal year. Any of that unspent, few dollars gets rolled into free cash if that comes to fruition. Is that?
So when you have these different increases, where are the funds coming from to make these increases?
New growth.
Oh, okay.
So you
So,
you
the
raised,
167.
yeah, that's your new revenue source.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
Right, so,
So the Board of Assessors tells us what they're doing to put into the model for new growth. And we have to do this before we certify the tax rate in 2 weeks.
Mhm.
Ken, did you have something?
no, I was just gonna say, I was gonna do the math, just adding the numbers. If you add all the numbers here, it's net zero essentially, is what you're
Right.
saying, yeah.
And you do have to take into consideration the revenue loss from state aid.
Yes. Yeah, the 167 less the 17,680 and then everything else.
So this is, from my recollection, this is smaller than normal, isn't
Very small.
it? Yeah, I was gonna say, this is,
Usually, it's not too much higher, but usually it's around $250,000. But I think one of the reasons why was we adjusted the FY '25 budget in April and May based on the House budget and the Senate budget, which we don't normally do.
okay.
So that's why the number's usually larger. So when the Senate budget came in at $335,000 over what the governor's budget was, we changed the budget in May and gave that money to the school department in account 300 when we went to the council in May. So that's one of the big reasons. Usually we do the local aid recap now. But because last year of the budget constraints, but also the legislature poured a ton of money into the Chapter 70 formula, we never anticipated last year that we would see a bump of almost $350,000 in local aid in May.
Okay, so.
So, one question, and this is a small question, probably for Ryan. The recreation line item, that was, it's an increase, but it's offset by revenue, so that's offset by something that's not on here. I'm curious just what the
We'll get to it
revenue is.
later when we look at the year-end, if you look at the year-end revenues for FY '24, you'll notice that they were far higher than what we had anticipated, and we'll talk about that later if people have questions. By the time Ryan comes in at the end of the year, his program fees will have paid for that increase. Probably several times over, actually. Right.
So we should see excess from that essentially, that's not accounted for,
Right,
that'll go into our capital or whatever.
exactly. Yep.
Anybody else? Is there a motion you want? Or do we want to?
You know, per the charter, you guys make recommendations to the council, so this is a vote to recommend these adjustments to the town council. They'll vote on these on the 13th, and then the tax rate hearing will be on November 20th.
But this
And
is
then,
already
and then all of
accounted
us
for.
then move on, after, other staff will do a lot of reports for the state, and then we'll move on to FY '26. Yeah,
This has already been accounted for and spent? Or has any of this money been spent yet? 167,000?
no,
Did the HR department already adjust a full-time down to a part-time
Yeah.
and have that, yeah?
we haven't hired the individual, yeah, the position was never advertised yet.
Yeah, you're waiting
but-
for the approval in order to do that, is what
Exactly.
it is. Okay,
Yep.
just,
Yep.
okay.
But to be clear, like number 8 is happening, whether or not we approve it or not, right? You know, there's additional expenses that can't be controlled. Yeah,
Yeah, and the revenue should be accounted for
Yeah,
too, because
yeah.
actually, the 167, which actually is gonna get probably ticked up just another few hairs after the assessors formally vote, that's critical to, now that 167,000, times that by 2.5%, and you add that into your FY '26 model.
Yeah.
So that tax base and that tax levy goes into the levy for '26, and that's how you, that right in and of itself is your revenue, is your main revenue source for the entire town.
Anybody else?
I can make a motion. So I make a motion to approve, recommend to the town council to raise and appropriate, general fund appropriations that total 149,320, all offset by an increase in new growth.
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. And do you have any more comments on
Sorry,
any of the
pointer.
A, B, C, and D?
Yeah, I just wanted to put in the Q1 year-to-date expense report, in case folks have any questions, and we put in the revenue report, just to make sure we give folks proper updates. If you look through the revenue and expenditure report, happy to answer any questions. Oftentimes people ask questions like on the town council, why have they spent 76% of their budget already? And that's because that's MMA dues, so you pay that on July 1st. So there's little nuances in every line item, and if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them. You know, like I said earlier, you know, one of the trends is certainly employee benefits. That number is high, by the way, at 66% because we pay the entire pension assessment on July 1st. So some of those things are weighted heavily into July and August because we're required to pay for memberships and assessments and regional assessments and stuff like that. But most of the rest of the departments are in great shape. And I would say the overwhelming majority of them If not, every single budget is spot on at this point in the year. You do have departments like DPW and facilities that also have those same dynamics. They can sometimes be a little front-heavy. And also, by the way, some departments don't spend any money until the spring, until there's some procurement or a bill or a service that comes in there. But by and large, the only real line item in here is the employee benefits with the unemployment insurance that I mentioned earlier, where we've pretty much already spent what was in the budget.
Can I ask a dumb question probably? What is the unencumbered? What does that represent?
Wait, did you just say unencumbered or did you say encumbered?
Yeah,
was
sorry, I
like-
did say unencumbered, I meant, yes, I meant encumbered.
Yeah. Which one are you looking at, just so I?
Well, just all, just
The
take the very first one, like the fire has 106,000 in encumbered.
Yeah.
Is that sort of, is that
Yep.
realized but not paid, or, is it accrued? I'm just curious what it is.
Oftentimes for fiscal reporting to the state, there's a lot of deadlines, so July 15th is when you need to have your encumbrances in to be able to qualify. So you're basically just moving money from one year's budget most likely because of contract. Services go longer than they overlap in multiple fiscal years. And so we have to report those to the state, and then they have to be expended within a certain time frame, or you have to report back to the state the money that you're carrying over from different years. So those line items there would basically, I may not know, and the staff may be able to answer for you the specific line item, but a lot of those, by the end of this fiscal year, when you get a quarter 3 report, I would guess the overwhelming majority of those would be spent by then. And so we're just carrying over money.
It's carried over from last year,
Yeah.
or just expense we have to incur this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, but we use the money from last year.
From last year to-
So that money
okay.
doesn't go to free cash.
Okay,
So it doesn't get certified as free cash. It is not in the capital program. And it's likely in most cases because of a contract that we have with a vendor, or maybe a contract got amended where the service couldn't get delivered on time, whatever the case may be. And we roll that over into the next fiscal year. And then there's state laws revolving around when you can use those.
okay.
That's a great question, by the way, Lauren. That was not dumb. I've never been asked about that, so that's a good question. Those are the ones we like.
Trey, the schools have $60 million. That's gotta be contractual stuff? Like, it couldn't be last year's anything, I don't think. Not for that number. That's a lot of money. It's on,
It's a good question.
So
page
they've
3
only
of
spent
9.
10 million
60
to date?
$60,604,000. That's a lot of money. And it's listed as undefined.
Just to make sure everybody's aware, like the school finance is its own book. So if you look at the town attorney, when he's down here, he brings down the Mass Law of Finance Law, and it's about this thick, it's called the Blue Book. And the schools have their own book. So my educated guess, and you could ask the schools who are here, but my educated guess tells me is that represents a whole series of issues that are cross-current with fiscal year relating to probably the bulk of their budget as teachers. And my guess is that there's a rollover of a whole series of things that have to get reported to the state. But I just want to make sure everybody knows they're under almost a whole set of different Mass General laws in terms of municipal finance. But I don't want to put them on the spot. But do you know what the answer to that, John?
We encumber.
AI only hears you.
Good evening, Jana Melody, interim school business administrator. We do encumber all staff salaries ahead of time, so that's why you see that big number.
Can I clarify one thing on the encumbrances too, Jamie, and this is not school specific, but, so encumbrances, the column, like under, let's go to one that has both.
So on page 3, that fire, you've got encumbrances
Yeah,
as a
so
row.
like encumbrances on a 506,000 of its total expenses, 106 is encumbered, 115 is spent. That's like current year, right? So that's like 506, 115 is out the door. I've committed to 106 on current budget versus the encumbrance line, which is like carry forward from last year.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I'm just.
That's correct. Yep. I got
And
it.
then that makes sense on the school side, because it's like, when the majority of your budget is salary, that's gonna be a huge number in the column.
That's right.
And you wouldn't have a lot of carry forward on that, which is.
Remember, it's also revolving around fiscal year deadlines by the state, so this is probably something that happens in most towns.
Gotcha, okay. Got it, that's helpful.
Yep.
All makes sense now.
Anything else? Oops, Heather?
Oh, yeah, well, I was just thinking, it would be good to see this, on a regular basis during our meetings, to kind of gauge the spend, and how close the budgeting was and all of that, so, I don't know if this is like a quarterly report or something to that effect, and I also don't even know when our next meetings are. Most of them are joint, so it would be just great to stay on top of this.
Yeah, we
Because when
usually
we
do
come up to
them,
May, then we're not like, whoa, look at it, how did you spend all that? Rather, we could discuss it quarterly or regularly.
we usually do it quarterly.
do.
You're right, a couple meetings have been transformed into joint budgets, but we're not gonna let all joint budget meetings take away FinCom meetings too. In a couple weeks, the council will be voting on their 2025 calendar. And just for new folks, we also do the FinCom calendar, the community preservation calendar, and the senior center office hours calendar. We do a whole series of calendars. And so then we'll have a better idea of when the finance committee meetings will be. I know you'll have one in January for sure, to deal with the capital plan. It's on the end of the agenda. And then I'll probably, if we have all the numbers and we can do it, we'll try to get we'll usually have a Q2 report in January. And then we'll also have one in May, somewhere around that, to go at Q3. But our staff watch those numbers too, obviously on a more frequent basis. If there was a red flag, they would certainly send it up, obviously to me and let us know, so. But we try to do these on a quarterly basis, and by the way, we do the same thing with revenues, right, which is the next sheet down, which shows our local receipts, which generally are revenues that offset a lot of our own costs here. It's kind of similar to revolving funds. So the revenues that we bring in on the municipal side pay off a lot of our staff that bring in those revenues, even in my office. So we generally do a Q1, Q2, Q3 report. And then this meeting, because it's so late in November, if we had one in September, we would have given you the full year, which is down later on the agenda. So we do try to bring these things up just to try to get everybody to gauge in and take a look at stuff and make sure we're putting those numbers out there.
One other ask
Sure.
for me, and this is, Jamie, you might have heard me speak to something like this before. Just for ease of comparison for people who also look at these documents, it would be helpful to capture, and it doesn't, maybe not every year, and my question is really, I don't know how easy it is, but something to consider, where you have the prior year's actual, just, as a column in addition to, to the columns you have here already. Don't know if that's easy. I know that could create some noise that we might want to avoid, but just wanted to raise that for consideration. Because it can help us get a better handle of where things are going and where they have been.
Sure. I'll talk to the staff about it. These are pretty formalized things, so I'll see if Crystal Reports
it's possible.
can tweak it a little bit to try to do that. I'll see what I can talk to the staff about.
His hair's turning gray.
Yeah. I've seen it turn a few gray in the last 2 months since he's been here.
As I'm looking kind of just at the control sheet, all of this makes sense, but I was just thinking back to seeing how the trends are going, and Heather's point made me think about it, like, where might we end up with a little bit extra, hopefully, versus going over when we actualize the budget, which I know usually that's how we fund CapEx. But is there plans, I can't remember if this was, when we did the 2 million kind of budget stabilization transfer, was there any language that the council put in place that the first 500 of excess cash has to go back to the pot? Or is there no rules, it was just given and then we are up to determine how it goes from there?
So just to I think I get your question, but correct me if I'm wrong. So the council did not take 2.2 million in rainy day money. They only authorized 1 million. The additional 1.2 million that went to the schools were actually cuts to the municipal departments. So when you look at the actuals later on, the tough part is a lot of the money that was left over in the actuals actually then ended up getting cut in June and July to go to the school department. So you'll look at, like, say the comptroller's office on the actuals shows a surplus of 135,000, just for example. That actually wasn't there. First of all, we hired people with that money after July 1st. And then number two, we cut the comptroller's budget, whatever it was, like 35,000 during those reforms. So the actuals on the sheet down below on the agenda doesn't actually reflect what got certified then to free cash. It was pretty close, but it's not exact. So I hope that answers your question on that. They did commit the night they used the budget rainy day money. They did commit verbally. It was not part of a vote, but they did commit to replenish that 1 million of free cash from this year, certified in October or November. 1 million of that free cash would go back into the rainy day fund. So they verbally kind of made that commitment. You know, we're gonna have to talk about that in a couple months. Obviously, when the budget debate, you know, when we really have local aid numbers in February, and I'll give an update on FY26 in a little bit. But there's gonna be big decisions around whether you're gonna deposit that back. That is just depending on wherever we're at with all the other conversations about FY26. But the night they transferred that, they definitely made a commitment to use $1 million, but $1 million from free cash would go back in to replenish it, so that the budget stabilization fund had at least 3 million, which was our target in our policy.
Got it, okay, that is helpful, thank you.
But it had 5 million.
No,
It had 4.
it had 3.
Oh, it had 3.
It had 3. It went down, it had a little bit more, it was like 3.1. But it was like 3.1, and they appropriated 1 million, so now there's 2.1-ish. Actually, the stabilization, the report probably has the actual number in the packet. But I just want to make sure it's clear, like, the 2.2 million that they routed to the school budget, 1 million of that was rainy day money, 1.2 million of that was cuts to municipal departments.
Just refresh me, where did the money come from originally for the rainy day fund? Was that free cash funded, or surpluses, or?
It was largely surpluses. It was a recommendation that, you know, and I always feel like I tell too many historical stories, but I think with new members and folks, the rainy day fund in 2017 had about 1.9 million in it. There was a verbal commitment at those meetings when the schools had budget troubles in those years that the council would drain the entire rainy day account to go to the schools, and part of that verbal commitment, if you will, was that we would start working on an override in 2018-19. And so the pandemic hit, and we lost a boatload of revenue. If you go back and read the memos, I think it was 25 to 35% of our revenue. Enter CARES Act money. Schools had different chunks of money. Then come federal ARPA funds. The town did not use a dime of federal ARPA funds in its operating budget. The schools, as we know, used about $1.5 million. But over the course of the free cash for those last 3-4 years, since I can't believe in March it's going to be 5 years to the pandemic, but over those years where we were supplementing budget, the revenues began to climb back. But nobody really knew if the hotels would fill up during all those regulatory periods in 2001, 2022. Saw a window of opportunity to increase the bond rating, and that was always one of the biggest things that our bond rating agencies would always talk to us about is, well, you don't have any surplus for your budget, you've got healthy stabilization accounts and savings accounts elsewhere, but you have nothing for a rainy day in your operating budget. And we knew that in 2017, 18, and 19 when we drained that account for the budget problems that were there. And so we took that chance. We were not really competing to be a AAA bond rating community anyway due to other factors at that time. But a lot of those revenues to funnel for the current 3 million surplus was really because of the revenue growth that we had over the last few years post-pandemic.
one more question.
sure.
On the local receipts enterprise fund, so through the first quarter, we're at 28% when 25% of the year is through, so we're running ahead, right? Just by
Lauren,
just
again,
general.
fantastic question. So usually what I do is I go down, so the water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste, you just forget about those for a minute. If you look up above, you see general fund 0100, and you all the way across. Generally what I do is I look at the percentage collected in the aggregate at 21%.
Mhm.
And then I say, this year it was low. That was low. But if you go up to the revenue sheet, if you go up to the top for motor vehicle excise, we don't collect that till March. So that's a pretty big chunk of money. Also, good indicators are meals, hotel, and cannabis. All of those percentages are above benchmark at Q1. So when I'm looking at that, we look at that and say, okay, those are good, those are good. You look at the fees on the ambulance, for example, they're already at 33% of what we projected. That's a good example of a dynamic we can't predict because we don't know how many people are going to call for EMS services, right? So that number is showing you a higher number, which means they're getting more EMS calls. So we go through each of these line items a little bit and we just check them out. Some of them, I will admit, you don't know whether fines are, you don't really want to collect a lot of revenue in fines. You don't. You don't. But generally when you see the Q4 report down below for 24, the aggregate comes out to about 120%. So we basically collected about 20% higher revenue than we anticipated. What I will do is in a little earlier than usual this year, but normally, as all of you know that have been on FinCom for a while, when I get to the end of March, before I put out the town administrator's budget, I check those numbers at Q3 to make sure we are really in good shape. Depending on how we are this year at Q2, because everybody's jumped the budget process up a few months, I'm hoping these revenues get closer to 50%, obviously. And what I would love to do possibly, depending on how the revenues come in, is what I have done in the past is, by the final budget proposal, I'll increase local receipts $250,000, $500,000, whatever the number is, because I know that we have good trends to show that we're gonna be able to offset the costs from the municipal staff with the fees that are coming in. Some of them I can easily project, like the alcohol licenses in my office. You have a certain amount of alcohol licenses that go out. It's a certain fee. We know whether they're going out of business or not. What's more difficult to predict are EMS, building permits, stuff like that are much more market-based, right? So we want to make sure that we're not over-committing, because the worst thing to do is come back to you guys in June and say, oops, we were really way off, and now we have to slash $500,000 in the current budget, or going into the next fiscal year, you're already in the hole, right? Mm-hmm. So we try to look at the trends and the metrics and see where the consumer behaviors are. That's why meals, hotel, cannabis, some of those are based on usage taxes, right? And so those numbers are pretty decent going into the winter and the fall. And our biggest time of year is at the end of the year in spring, when people really use hotels more, eat out more, and apparently consume cannabis more. So, and I would say finally on this, as somebody who's dealt with the cannabis issue for, 8 years now, this is a huge economic development winner for the town. I mean, probably by the time this is fully matured, it's probably going to be about $400,000 to $500,000 a year in revenue that didn't exist a few years ago. So this could be a lot worse, right? But we've been fortunate enough to have two incredibly good businesses come to town, one of which is the largest manufacturer on the East Coast, and they have their headquarters here. They've bought up several buildings. They've revised those buildings and renovated them, which means more tax levy and property tax growth. So that's a really good economic development project. I bet you, between new growth and what excise is coming in, I bet you're almost to $750,000 to $1 million worth of guaranteed revenue a year just from those businesses being in town alone. That's the manufacturers as much as the two retail stores. So, the medical side of things is tax-free, so that does not show up in here. This is just the recreational sales.
So just so I'm understanding this correctly. If, you know, you focused on the general fund, the other funds, you've got less control over, but overall, because we've had one quarter, we're through one quarter, you're generally looking at 25% will be the target, except it'll be slightly lower because motor vehicle taxes, because of the timing there. Okay, and then a couple other spots. But that's essentially the ballpark way of looking at it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Anybody else?
I don't know if now's the time to ask about that stabilization, or that comes up in a couple minutes.
It's a little later in the agenda, but
I
there's
can
no
wait.
reason why you couldn't ask for it now, but
That's fine.
maybe just,
So we sent on, all the way through FY '25 with local receipts, which we've got. Item 6, the build out deep dive series, school and finance reorganization, which is on the screen.
through you, Mr. Chairman, so I printed out a copy, I'm sorry for the font, I know we tried to cram it all on one page. You know, for us, I'll speak a little bit for Karen, but if anybody has any questions for any of the staff, most folks are here tonight. So this is our new reorganized school and town finance and HR reorganization. I can't say enough and thank Lucas and Tina and Bob and Jana and Ken Strelazzi and just the entire team for being great team players on this. This is something Karen and I have been working on for about 7 years. A lot of this has to do with the fact that if you go on the second floor here over the last year and a half, I bet you 75% of the staff have turned over at the payroll level, AP level. And a lot of those changes certainly were on the school side. They've done a fantastic job hiring some new folks. So the left side of the chart is the school org chart. As you can see, for us, particularly on the municipal side, but also for them, we've been able to create an org chart that gives much more staff capacity, far greater bandwidth, and I'd be remiss if I said, for the schools especially, they never had a deputy HR director. I know we've talked about electronic files for a long time and stuff, onboarding, systems, the superintendent has talked about, economies of scale. For the investment, as you want to grow as an organization, as things get more complicated, I don't need to tell any of you in the private sector, you have to also add more admin staff to be able to make sure paychecks are getting out, benefits are done correctly. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that our staff do that oftentimes doesn't get recognized. There's a lot of one-off problems that we have to solve too, a lot of quality control issues. We have the audits, the recaps, we have tons of reports to give to the state, Community Preservation Act reports, federal audit reports.
It would
I mean, all sorts.
I wondered if you had anything that would, or a
I
slide.
think you have to go
maybe.
through the chair.
Oh, through the chair. Do you mind? Is it through the chair? If you had something that, we could see the difference, because I appreciate the work and everybody, of course, has more admin work, but it's a reorg, so what was it before?
We didn't have people.
Well, you did, you had a superintendent, you had a town administrator, and you had
I'm
something
sorry.
something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. So, I was kind of going to get to that. So the new
Oh,
staff
that's what you're
is
saying.
the deputy school business administrator. So Jana now has a full-time school business administrator that's an assistant. That was not here before. The,
The role was there, though, it was in flux.
nope,
So, the woman, Miriam, I believe was her name?
Miriam was the school business administrator. She was the boss. So Jana's position was Miriam's position.
That's what I'm saying, so the position didn't exist, it's not a new position.
No, the school business administrator has always been there.
Right.
The assistant school business administrator was not there.
Deb Irvine on this chart.
Deb
It's
Irvine.
brand new.
Deb, Laura.
Okay. So that's the new,
That's one of the new positions, yeah.
okay.
And the same thing with human resources. The schools have only had one human resources director and one administrative assistant, which was Susan Childers. So Shannon Dixon just got added. And then they have 2 admin staff, support staff that have been there for years.
Does-
Debbie Pittman, sorry.
Can I ask a question? Does the school have their own procurement? Only because I see it, the procurement's on the town side, but on the school side, maybe it just doesn't fall underneath finance and HR under the school. I was just curious, is there one central procurement, or do they have their own procurement?
We've been working a lot more collaboratively. They're using our procurement officer for a lot of basic procurement services, particularly, they use government under 30B, which is just the statute of just general purchasing of goods and stuff. And I think there's some other unique stuff that Jana and her staff individually work on that are more school-specific related. But I also know that Colin uses our procurement officer a lot too. So what we're trying to do is really utilize everybody on the second floor as one large team. It doesn't necessarily perfectly do that, but in their job descriptions, those features are added in there to make sure that collaboration is a key element for it. And I think Pam's been very helpful to the school staff on many occasions. Because we have access to like the state bid list, right? So we might be able to get services or other items for a much cheaper price, less contractual issues where we don't have to do a procurement if they're on the state bid list. So we have one account for that and Pam. And so the schools do use Pam for that. So there is a little bit of overlap for sure.
This is a tricky question, because I'm sure, obviously, the work is there's a lot of organization that needs to happen, but there's a lot of budget scrutiny.
Yeah.
So this is a +2 head count.
Yeah.
Is there opportunities for efficiencies, or what was like the, return on investment type of work that was done to kind of be like, we're gonna put these 2 in, but this is how it's gonna make the schools a better place? Because there's students too, so just trying to balance all those questions.
It's really hard to summarize in a short period of time, I think, exactly how much work was on the school department's plate. That was certainly falling on the municipal staff for many, many years, ever since we moved into this building for 20 years. I don't think there's really an ROI metric other than the fact that there's just so much work to do. And not every T was being crossed well, not every I is being dotted. And I think there was just an overwhelming amount of stress and anxiety and certainly fatigue and certainly burnout on almost everybody on the second floor relating to the quantity of work that needed to get done. And then the second part of that is where you really are going to get, I think, in the short to long-term range, maybe medium range, we never got to onboarding projects with the entire staff. We never got to any human resource efficiencies. We never got to electronic file. We still haven't done the personnel records for 3 years. Now, I'm using those as because I know a few of you have been on the committee for a while. I know those projects have been lingering around for a long time. And trust me, there's another, couple dozen of those projects. A big part of Evan's position with budget director moving forward are going to be people ask us questions like, could you give us a list of the COLA percentages for all the unions over the last 15 years? And then we'd have to go scramble to pick up the work. We'd have to go do them after hours. Employees are doing work all over the weekends to try to get all that data together. And what we're trying to create is a system of people down here, both for school and town, that are all working together to share data, to make sure we're all on the same page, so that every time someone requests something like Ken did earlier, I don't have to go and we don't have to redo everything. So we're trying to create a lot more infrastructure. And the personnel records is like a perfect example of something that's taking up a huge amount of space down here. We don't need to do that, but you need staff to do all that work. You need to scan everything, you need to catalog everything, you need to create the filing system for it. We might have to hire a consultant to do it, but if you don't have the bandwidth to do it, benefits is just, I don't even know how to describe what kind of an enormous task that is. For the schools to have almost 1,000 employees and have one human resources director just is, I shouldn't have to say more than that. To have one school business administrator for an organization that's about $100 million in money, with money coming in and out, cash going in, it's just so much. And so from a bandwidth standpoint, I think if I were to look at metrics, I'd look at burnout first. I even get a little burnt out from this. I mean, a lot of this was falling on my shoulders too. This isn't just it's not just them. I mean, a lot of this, I mean, I'm writing the budget every year, you know, I mean, and I love doing it, but like I need, somebody else has got to do this stuff. It's just the volume of what people are asking us to do is just far exceeding our ability to do it. And
So under the town side, what are the new positions in the town side?
So there are really most of these positions have been, the first one is Emma Collins, who's over there, who's our benefits coordinator. She started maybe 6 months to a year ago or so. Maybe 4 months? She's gonna say 4 months? She's done such a great job, I thought she was here for the whole year.
We had the position for about a year before that,
Yeah.
that person moved on.
There was also in the
So
budget.
that's not a new position then?
Well, yeah, it is.
In the
We-
past
we-
year and a half.
Is this a new FY '25 position?
No.
No.
Okay,
But-
so that's not new.
Let me finish, Heather. So you, unfortunately, when you look at the returns on the comptroller's office, we've been working on this redesign for years. So we had put money in the budget for a munis administrator. We put it out twice. That was for town and school position to deal with our munis software. We could not find any candidates. So that's an example of the benefits coordinator. We were looking at it as a school and town joint position to manage all school and town benefits, and that took a long time. So the money was in the budget in FY '24, but it's a new position where we just hired Emma recently. So yes, it is a new position based on the person who just showed up, but it was in the budget for over a year, but we couldn't get the right person we couldn't get the right people to apply for the right jobs.
That makes
So,
sense.
sorry, I just wanted to clarify that, because it's not exactly brand new. And then the only other one, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong on here, is the part-time admin in your office. And then the final position was the deputy CFO and budget director, which is Evan, who's right up here. So really, you're looking at a +2.5. So overall, you're looking at about, well, Cheryl changed. So Cheryl Connell was with the school department, not a new position, and just got transferred over to the municipal side. And now the town manages all payroll. So we've streamlined payroll. We used to have 4 positions, now we have 3. And we still have 2 people doing AP, one for the schools and one for the town.
And so you used to have 2 payroll admins under town, 1 under schools, but you shifted the school to the town.
That's
So it's
correct.
all in one spot
So
now.
it's all in one spot, so.
And that's, falls under the town,
That's correct.
but, okay.
Right. So everybody's cross-trained on all contracts, right? So the school used to only know the school, town only used to know the town, and then when the school person was out, the town would have to do that work but didn't know all the details. And then vice versa.
Yep.
So now everybody's learning all contracts, all payroll, all financial procedures, and we're empowering them to make those decisions on how to streamline payroll. So now all 3 individuals know payroll in and out for both, so if someone's out, we have a backup. So part of this too is really about a lot of cross-training and making sure that our organizations all understand what everybody's doing. In a perfect world, we'd all have one organization chart, right? But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but just the reality of the fact that some people report to the school committee and some report to the town. But when you get on the second floor down here, we don't really see those lanes. We're trying to build a culture where everybody knows what everybody's doing. And I give a tremendous amount of credit to Kerry and Jonna for laying that out over the past 5 months.
Is there a world where the human resources director does both? Do you have one chief?
Trying to do forever out of town.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, there's very, very few municipalities that do that. I think the city of Newton's one. We've entertained that conversation, but I think each team believes that they need their own person to do that. But 10, 15, 20 years from now, you know, that might be the case.
We'll see a chief people officer.
I'm going to be honest with you. You are not going to see a chief people officer here while I'm here. You're not going to see any other staff here while I'm here. This took 7 or 8 years, actually 20 years to do. I think we've got great people in the right spots. I don't think we're going to see chief people officers or any other position. And to, I think Natalie's point, I mean, the pressures on the budget are just too significant. I don't think you're gonna see a lot of new positions across the board.
So other than adding a few new positions and shifting one role, why is this a full reorg? Is it really? Or, I mean, am I missing something? Was FY '24 vastly different than this? Other than the couple new positions?
For us, I would say, this is, in local government, this is a triumphant achievement. Normally, in almost 99% of the cities and towns in Massachusetts, the school department and the town never talk. So the fact that we're able to work together on something like this and streamline things like payroll, build systems within our munis and our financial software where everybody's seeing the same things, having our HR directors work collaboratively to develop a unified onboarding process, trying to deal with the cross-training among the rank and file staff. I think they may not be reflected here in terms of the overall positions on where the boxes are, but culturally and systemically, these are hugely, like if I went to a manager conference and talked about this, they'd say we could never do something like this. So from us, it's more of a cultural issue, it's a more systemic issue, and making sure that we're all working together.
Anyone else?
Do the colors represent anything?
Yeah.
No,
No? Okay.
just like trying to deviate a little bit so it's not all white and black.
Okay, that's fine, just curious if they
Yeah,
represent.
no, they don't.
anything.
It's like different departments a little bit, but it doesn't mean anything else.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to FY '24 preliminary expense recap, local receipts, year-end stabilization. Please.
Happy to answer any questions, just these are the year-end numbers, and the CFO and the staff have tried to put them out here as what other documents we have, so they're more consistent a little bit. But you can see in FY '24 at the end, some of our numbers came in really well. And so it's really important to know that these are your revenue sources that go into free cash. So if we have a bad local receipts year, or if departments are not doing well with their budgets, that also affects the capital program. And as the new members will see, but as many of you that went through the last year, the schools tap a significant amount of the capital expenditures as well. So happy to answer any questions folks have.
Can I just one, under the water enterprise fund for, the local receipts, just curious, what's in the other departmental really overshot the budget, just curious, and I mean, the dollars aren't large, but just curious what's in that.
Well, it's glad we have the DPW director here to bring us up to speed. We wouldn't want him to come out and not have a chance at the mic.
Sorry, I gotta look at it.
What's the, it just says water use, it just says basically other departmental services. Do you have any idea?
The budget was
what
only
the-
72 and it came in at
Yeah.
320, so.
are those permitting, are those permitting fees? I think
Yes.
I think they're permitting fees.
Permitting fees? Okay.
For connection, like, for example, like a water connection.
Yeah,
So that, there's a fee that goes in if you connect into the water system, so that would show. Those don't happen often, they only happen either by approval of council or if there's roadway projects, which there's been a lot of. But we're gonna get a little more, I delayed till we get up here.
It's mostly for the new developments where you notice that, and that's particularly if you look across the street, a couple of those big buildings over there, apartments and stuff like that. So we actually get more funds from those. That's why they're much more noticeable. It's hard for us to predict that
yeah.
when we do the budget. We kind of have a rough idea. Next year I could carry, we do rolling averages. I could do 300,000 and we could do 15,000. So that's why it's in there like that.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a great question.
Stabilization, is that in here somewhere? questions on the stabilization report? Very last page in the pile of papers. You guys.
So the town council voted to give $1 million to the schools out of the stabilization funds.
Yep.
Thank you for the explanation earlier that it was created essentially for the schools. I did not hear, and I may have just missed that part, about how they said that it would be replenished, that $1 million, and I just probably missed it. I'm wondering if, at this point, you or anybody can see where $1 million would come from to put into a stabilization fund.
So it'll come from free cash. The second thing I'd say is, at the meeting, I think it was either June 26th or July 17th, I think it was the June meeting, at like maybe 12:30 at night, when we were trying to figure out what to do, and I read the 9 of counselors and kind of threaded the needle to compromise it. And I said to them, because one of the counselors had made an idea to use the rainy day fund, I'd said that we can do that if you commit to replenishing that in a year. I don't think the rest of the council wanted to take money out of the rainy day fund, because, just to be clear, it can be used for schools. It is not there unilaterally for schools. It is there for budget stabilization for the entire town budget.
Okay.
And so we've used it for schools exclusively, but that's not why it's there. But our bond rating agencies want a standard policy, which we do have in the financial policies, a goal, and they want to see you incrementally, of course, try to increase those reserves to make sure that you stay ahead of and make sure we can continue our AAA bond rating status. A bunch of counselors for sure, staff, I think a lot of people in the community never thought we would get there, and so now that we're there, and it obviously allows us to save a lot of money on interest rates when we borrow, the town has created certainly a priority that we want to maintain the AAA bond rating status. And if we deplete those revenue sources, the next time we go out to borrow, that may be something that they reference, and we don't want to take a chance to go back down to AA plus. And so they committed that night to using the budget stabilization. And so I will propose in the capital plan to use $1 million from free cash to replenish that account in the capital plan in January.
And then, could I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
And then, a lot of talk about the bond rating
Yeah.
and how this impacts that. And what has been the impact after taking $1 million out of it?
We haven't had to go out to do a bond rating yet, so we wouldn't know.
You don't know, okay, yeah. Will
I
you?
mean, I can tell you it helped the schools, so that's a really good positive.
No, I'm clear on
but-
that, I know that, I know that, and they
Well,
were
we-
able to use those one-time funds for their things that they could do for one time.
Just to
But
be clear,
this-
it wasn't one-time funds, right? So this is a big misnomer. So that money was put into their budget. And if you look at the 5-year forecast, I didn't deplete their budget from 77.4 million to 76.4 million. I times the 2.5% off the 77.4 million. So I understand the perception is one time. We obviously have a partial budget deficit because of that, absolutely. But it's embedded in their final budget as part of their operating budget. And I think we would hope, the goal is to make sure that's sustainable. So I think that's another reason why the replenishment of the account was a priority for the council in order to vote to take that money out.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I guess my biggest concern when this took place, unfortunately, wasn't run through another committee, it was straight to the council that night. So was there thought around that bond rating? Would there be something that we needed to borrow between now and when the next free cash comes along to put that in there? What is the impact to our town budget for taking that $1 million out?
Again, I think
Is
there's
it
no
nothing,
impact.
or is
Well,
it just?
I wasn't anticipating a borrowing because we
Right.
were in a budget deficit and in a budget crisis, so we're not gonna go spend and borrow more money to do that. But I think given the community voices around the schools, that's not something we take lightly. And I do sincerely apologize, you're right, we didn't run it through any other committees. Honestly, the pressure was on, we didn't really have any time to run it through any committees. And the pressure was on me that night and the council to figure out some sort of solution, so I just tried to thread the needle. You're right, we didn't review that, but I felt very confident in making that recommendation that night, because I knew that we weren't gonna go out to borrow for anything else soon. And if people asked me, I was gonna say no anyways. And number three, the council committed to replenish it, and also I think the schools really could use that money, so they did, and that's actually partially what's helped them with the reorg up here. So I think in the moment, given all the factors, I didn't see at that time we were gonna go out to our bond rating agencies, so I didn't see that there might be a threat. Do I think the bond rating agencies would whack us down a notch just because of that $1 million? I don't think they would have. But it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And I will say this is where history is important. This did happen in 2017, 18, and 19. As people probably know, we did a one-year contract at the time with all the municipal unions to get on the same cycle as the teachers so that the community could try to work together toward a collective override. Obviously, that didn't work out at that time. But I'm going back in history at the time, the reason why the budget rainy day fund was depleted at that point put us in a financially tough position. But the work we've done the last 6 years, in light of all those things, we were able to get this account up to that level, get the AAA bond rating, which people told us we would never be able to achieve, and so we're in a good position. But I honestly didn't believe that if we did have to go out to borrow, that that would be the black mark, that they would say, all right, now you're a AA+. And a big part of that was community preservation and the tri-county debt exclusions, meaning voters here were showing they were willing to raise revenues and taxes to solve problems, right? And that's a huge factor in the bond rating reports. If you look at them online, you know, both of them cited those variables in there. So I felt like we were still in a pretty strong place, especially because that was, you know, we had already had enough advantages in our cart that I think $1 million wouldn't have shown a bad deal. But on that same end, I know some of the elected officials remember 2018 and 19, and when that went to zero, that did put us in a tough position. And so I think, you know, once bitten, twice shy, I think people, including myself and the staff, don't want to go back there, and we don't want to deplete those revenues if we don't have to any further.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. That's something that's been really concerning to me for a while. I haven't had a chance to reach out, or
Yeah.
you're wicked busy anyways, so.
No.
But I agree with you about the slippery slope, and I would be concerned that somebody would see 2.2 million and say, well, why don't we just take that and use it for what we need to use it for? And for all the reasons you just said, so,
I would just add on there, you know, you're, in all likelihood, at some point in the next year and a half, as we've articulated at the joint budget meetings, you're gonna need the Remington Jefferson remodel. On a 10-year note, that's 1.1 million a year roughly. The other part to your argument, Heather, is, you know, you can drain that, but then when you go to borrow for a police station or remodel or whatever, or just general infrastructure, you know, whether it's, even if it's from the enterprise funds, right, for water projects or sewer projects, that interest will add up well beyond what's in that account real quick, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
So you can move it all around, but, you know, ultimately your safety net is, you know, would evaporate, and it would actually result in higher costs for the taxpayers.
and then if it stayed at 2.2, like it didn't go, we didn't replenish it this year, let's just say, is that a huge impact to the bond rating? Or we don't know until
I don't
we
think-
go to borrow?
Well, also, I think we wouldn't know until we went to borrow, and I wouldn't anticipate borrowing until we were ready to do either the police station or Remington Jefferson. So it's gonna be some time. My hope is interest rates will come down and the markets will continue to fly, but you never know in a year and a half. If all of us can predict what's gonna be here, we wouldn't be here. I'd be retired, and why, if I could have that kind of prediction level. But I think all of you are in finance and you know that you know, what's coming up, we don't know. So I know that bond rating agencies for sure like to see stabilization accounts and reserves for sure, especially in volatile marketplaces. So it's really hard to say, Heather. I mean,
No, thank you, that's
it's a
good.
good, it's a great question, though. They're all great questions.
Mr. George? I'm going backwards, I apologize, but I'm just kind of thinking through the stabilization and then how that, kind of the free cash. The free cash is made up of the elements that we saw in the previous pages, right? So like if I look at what's getting returned to the general fund, that's gonna go towards the free cash piece, right? Like that was
Yep.
what didn't get spent, which was the 1.553, right?
Yep.
As well as the excess of the receipts in the general fund bucket, right? So we're looking at like somewhat like 4.2-ish.
Pretty darn close.
Okay.
There's a couple of other government things, like, we talk about abatements and overlay from the Board of Assessors. There's other things reporting-wise we have to do by law, but you are about 300,000 off.
Okay, so
So
we're
you're
like,
pretty darn close.
and I know we'll look at this in January, but preliminarily, we're looking good to fund our usuals, return the piece that we borrowed, and then still have room for the CapEx, which aren't really CapEx, that we do have to spend anyway.
CapEx, yeah,
Plus
that's
some
correct.
real CapEx.
Pretty close, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, we're, due to the, I think, one-time costs associated with redistricting and a couple of other things like that, we're probably not gonna have as much bandwidth as we normally have, especially with the 1 million going back in the rainy day fund. But I still think we're gonna be able to fund public safety, DPW, some other school stuff. I know that there's some vans that are probably on the list for some replacements of vehicles. A lot of that should be still in very, very good shape.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Anybody else? Ooh, it's quiet. Future agenda items, next meeting, our December 11th meeting has been usurped.
Nope.
Joint budget?
No, there can be a meeting that night. Julie in my office should have sent out a note to the members of the joint budget meeting that we're anticipating another one on December 17th. And that's gonna be, we're gonna basically include a couple of additional assumptions, which I'll speak to in a minute. Actually, you skipped over a line item.
Yeah, it wasn't.
What did I do?
just-
FY '26 budget model.
So really quickly, we're in the process of redoing the fiscal forecast. The Norfolk County, this is just a heads up, the Norfolk County Retirement Board that governs our retirement system, long story short, redid their actuarial and never really gave us a heads up. And they were literally about to vote earlier this month on a $7 million increase to the town of Franklin, 1 year. Yeah. So all 27 managers or so in Norfolk County showed up at the Norfolk County Retirement Board meetings and sent a lot of letters, which I'm gonna give you all copies of at the December meeting, and show that in the last month we were able to prevent that from happening. That would have been literally catastrophic. That's twice the tax levy. And so they did go back, they gave 3 choices. And so the budget deficit at the last meeting, I think, was around 3.7. And now the budget deficit is gonna be 3.933 million. So we're gonna have to tack on about another 250,000 onto that deficit based on the vote of the county just on Monday. I was there, the meeting took 2 minutes, they did 2 roll call votes. But one of the things that's gonna have to pay very close attention to, and this is another project for me now, is they're gonna go back and redo their actuarial through 2035. Okay? And you'll see in the financial model when we re-put it out, you will see those deficits get exponentially larger in future years. It's to fully fund the pension system, if you will. Maybe people are familiar with those terms. We've asked the county for more engagement with the city and town managers in Norfolk County to make sure the assumptions that they're using in that are accurate. I did go to a meeting that the board held 2 weeks ago in Sharon, and suffice to say, there's a lot of very upset local officials in Norfolk County wondering why we weren't engaged in this process, why we weren't told about it, why they weren't giving us a heads up. and to make sure they know that if they want to be cute and they want to go out there and do this stuff without talking to us, there are layoffs coming from their decisions. So I know that they have their own problem. There's nothing we can do about it. The entire pension system is baked into state law. There's nothing we can do. But I expect over the next several months to have a new actuarial done by the county, and hopefully it'll spread out that pain over a longer period of time. If someday you all want a pension system lesson, I'm more than happy to give it. We've asked, by the way, the pension board to come here. They won't go to any municipality, which is irritating. In their defense, that's a lot of nights out, but they need to engage local groups more about what the impacts are given our budget constraints. But the good news is for FY26, we dodged a bullet, even though the deficit goes up a little bit. We're going to put out a revised forecast once I get those numbers together, but I'm not doing it until after the tax rate is set. And just so folks know, we are adding into that deficit that you know at the joint budget, we're adding in the $950,000 that was in Lucas's budget number into that model so people can see the comprehensive deficit and where those expenses are going. As a result of that, we're asking for the joint budget meeting on the 17th because some people couldn't do the 11th. So we will have a finance committee meeting if y'all want to on the 11th. The next agenda, you can let me know what you want on that agenda, the items you want, but we'll have one on the 11th, and then we'll also have one on the 17th. Will be the joint budget subcommittee. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about that Norfolk, the actuarial?
Yeah.
So basically, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Were any other towns affected
Everyone.
at that level? The $7 million, was it at that level?
There is no possible verbiage in my vernacular that I could possibly describe to tell people how much of a colossal disaster this could have been if people, one person somehow found out about it and sent an email to the entire county, and we're pretty shocked.
Yeah, it seems crazy that they could just go in and do that.
They have their own laws, what's called PARAC, which is the statewide retirement system. Just so you know, when you hear pension systems in Massachusetts, we have 100 of them. Exactly the same rules in every single one. The town of Brookline has their own pension system, same rules as every other pension system, but they have to just do it their way. Wellesley too, Needham too, I think. So you have own, it's just insane. But it's all the same rules, but they have a law from 2012 that probably needs to get updated if they worked with the legislature where they recalculated pensions and stuff. It's a long thing. Back in 2012, they made them do it through 2030 to fully fund. And then it got extended out to 2032, now 2035. Our pension system does need some cash flow to it in Norfolk County for sure. But to do it the way they were trying to do it is not the right way to do it. Just doing it in some kind of darkness and then saying, well, the board voted, here you go, was disingenuous. And I'm very disappointed because Kathleen, the director there, is tremendously good at what she does. But the board, I don't know what happened, but we, at least one person found out and let everybody else know. So that's at least good news for FY26 because that could have been really treacherous. Because you're beholden to the laws of the state, and the statewide PARAC system basically tells you what to do. So in their defense, they were getting orders, if you will, from the state to fill a deadline by Halloween that they were mandated under law to do. The biggest factor, in my opinion, was they changed the actuarial. So the previous person they were using retired, so they went out to bid, got a new company to do it, and that's exactly when you want the engagement of the local communities. School employees are affected by this too, by the way. Everybody who's not in the Mass Teacher Retirement System, all the other non-union or other employees that aren't teachers are all affected by this as well. So this isn't just a municipal thing. So when you change actuarials like that, that's like even more so of a red flag of saying, hey, what's the new company using as their assumptions? Are these reasonable? Is this what we're seeing at the local level too? So, I'm hopeful in the next couple months they'll start to engage us a little bit more on these things. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I had a lot of, that sort of answered all, yeah, thank you.
Anybody else?
Same question.
If you have a comment in the audience, oh.
Please.
Oh, Mr. Sherlock.
Steve Sherlock, Franklin Matters, Franklin Public Radio. Further clarification through you to Town Administrator, to Helen, if possible. The recollection I have is that at some point in time, and I think it was the 2030, and then it moved to 2032, now you're saying 2035, the Norfolk Retirement Board, once it was fully funded from our funding, those amounts were going to then be applied to OPEB to further reduce our expense and liabilities on that side.
Steve, you could be a town manager. No, he's right. This is where some of the difficulty was with this discussion. A lot of small communities, like the Sherburns or the Daytons, Plainvilles, like the smaller communities, they haven't had the resources for many years to put money away for OPEB. So they had seen this funding schedule as a way that, and for some of them, by the way, FY26 was the year that the pension assessments were supposed to drop down. And those communities had strategized 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and saying when those pension obligations come down, that's how we're going to fund our OPEB. So those communities, to some degree, were actually for the front loading of some of this. Fortunately, they were generally a minority within the county, but what that does is it creates, obviously, us versus them in the county dynamic, right? Where Randolph, Franklin, Westwood, Needham, a bunch of towns were going to get hit with huge assessments. But some of those other towns were like, well, wait a minute, we now can't fund OPEB, which we obviously have done a different job in Franklin on OPEB, but that's a great point, Steve. And we actually saw a drop off in pension liability in 2030 and beyond too. This is not a situation I want to be in. I was looking forward to those pension assessments coming down as well. But based on what they just did, and this is a post-pandemic actuarial as well, you have changing retirement dates. People are retiring earlier than they did before. People are getting into the system later than they have in life. I mean, there's a lot of variables that go into that study. Mortality rate has gone down a little bit, right? People are, believe it or not, like the age of living has slightly dropped. COVID effect. So there's some, we were kind of looking at them saying, can we find out based on these unique circumstances, is there some more equalization factors that we could do? And as a county managers association, we put a letter together with all of that in it. And it was ultimately effective. But to Steve's point, he's right. A lot of communities, even us, were looking at those pension numbers going down by 2029, 2030, 2031. But I can almost guarantee you, based on the stuff we just saw, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
So a follow-on question from that, since the clarification, and I don't normally ask questions like that, but when you get new board members,
Yeah.
I have that historical perspective, and I do remember, so it was good to bring out. One of the other, I'll call it liabilities, it certainly is hanging out there, is the Chapter 70 held harmless amount of 12 to 15 million, which the schools, because of the pressure on their budget, have never been able to do what the town side on OPEB has been able to do, and very successfully put money aside. You've got the OPEB account with the policy to add money to it from free cash each time. So that's adding to our overall AAA rating. At some point in time, I think the town needs to help the schools, because it's really Chapter 70, which comes to the town, they give to the schools. How are we going to start funding? Because it, heaven forbid, something ever happens at the State House. There's that 15 million liability that hits us immediately. And then what are we going to do? So, food for thought. We don't have to solve it now, but we need to start including that in the discussions. My 2 cents. Thanks.
I would say, and you know this, hold harmless has been a talking point of mine for a very long time. So this is an issue that has been on our radar. This is back to the point of hold harmless, of Susan Rohrbach's comment last April, which I highlighted in another presentation. She was spot on. The hold harmless is a dynamic of not doing mini overrides over the period of 10 or 15 years. Because at the end of the day, your net school spending, as Jonna knows in the formula, there's no way the town can actually help out that. I can't do anything about that. I mean, unless you just simply say the town gets 0 and the entire pie goes to the schools. That's the only way you can catch up on that. It's not reasonable. But to Susan's point, I think she brought it up in April, that's where longer term, to catch that hold harmless, somehow, some way, those $850,000, $500,000 programmatic overrides probably need to take place way down the line to help catch up for some of that, of what Steve's talking about.
By the way, OPEB is other post-employment benefits for you guys.
Chris knows all about it. Probably studies it at the. Ken?
Yeah, I do have one question through the chair. Jamie, how often does the Norfolk Retirement Pension Board do this reassessment? It'd be great if they push it out to 32, 36, whatever, but are they gonna be reassessing in 2 years? Like, how concerned should we be there?
It was exactly the point I brought up at the meeting when they were gonna vote on what we call option 1, which was like the nuclear version of the 7 million increase. Like you probably know, I said to them, like, you can do another actuarial in 6 months, like, but to sting towns with that kind of increase is gonna be a catastrophe at the local level. So they're under, I believe, the same OPEB schedule. Correct me if I'm wrong, shut up. But I believe they're under, they have to do a full actuarial every 2 years, and then there's a middle actuarial that has to be done now every year. The rules have changed where we used to be able to do them every 2 years with nothing in between, and now we have to do the full study every year. So some of this is like, it feels like a lot of work and a lot of wasted money. But I think given the state, by the way, has their own OPEB problem, and they also have their own pension system problem. And all of those require legislative changes, which is just, they're probably one of the hardest things to get done on Beacon Hill. So we're now trying to be good actors in the play and just say, we're now required to do our OPEB study. We do a limited one. We do one every 2 years, a full one every 2 years, and then those in-between years, we can do a limited update. And the county is, I believe, under the same exact rule set that we're under.
Okay, I think that's kind of getting to my point is of how do we actually make sure. Fantastic that that one person was aware and notified everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
without that, that's, that'd be a scary thought. But how do we avoid that? How do we make sure that someone is paying attention? That's really the broader question.
Based on the letter that went to the county, almost every town signed it. I think everyone's antenna is way up now on this. And, we still have not gotten a firm commitment from the county to engage us on this. I actually wrote an email to the whole team asking them to. So I hope soon they engage us on that for exactly that reason. Like, we need them to understand, and it was very much in the room the day they had the countywide meeting. They frequently were saying, the board was saying, well, we're not here to cut police and fire and school teachers, like, we're not, and I said, but that's the relationship and the impact. You can't just operate in a silo and then send these things to us and then pretend as if there's no impact. And I think politically for them, if they had done something like that, they'd be feeling the political impact because every select board member, every counselor, every elected official, probably in this case, every school board member, would be looking at the county saying, what are you doing? And they'd be under a huge microscope. So, I just, now it's on our radar. Now we're going to be following up with them. And for other communities, Ken, I know, I won't mention them, but I know a few other towns have been actively trying to get the county to come to these meetings. Nobody wants to beat them up. We just want to know what you're doing, and we want you to know the relationship of your decisions on the local budgets. That's all. So we're hopeful that they heed that message. But they are an independent board. They can kind of run their own show. So I think that's, a legislative related issue. But hopefully that's why we're having a couple meetings in December too. I hope by then I have some better updates on some of these things going into the new year.
Anyone? I added find on the agenda, that meeting I had with Natalie and Jamie, to allow committee members to make comments if they wish at the end of the meeting about whatever. The council does too, future agenda items, which I would include in this, and anything you wanna talk about, finance committee related,
Do we need to
so.
do the number or did we
No, that was it.
Yep.
Yeah, that was this.
budget model?
That was the plus 250.
Oh, okay, sorry, George.
That's okay.
Um,
Anybody have any comments they'd like to make?
I only have one comment about the December 11th meeting. I just don't know, it's a month from now. Are we gonna have anything more to talk about? I don't know if it's worth anyone's time, you know, with the budget subcommittee meeting being the next week. I just wasn't sure if I'm happy to get together. I just don't know what's gonna develop in the next month that would warrant us get together, you know, versus waiting for the next one after.
It's gonna be the same information. If it's about FY '26, it'll be the same stuff.
Yeah, so that was.
How's this, if something comes up that we should talk about, we'll have the meeting, if not, we'll skip it,
Oh,
okay?
okay.
Plus, it's Christmas time,
It is, it's a
Yeah.
holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
everybody would rather.
I'm sure
be
everybody
outside.
wants to be out here. Sure.
Anything else? Motion?
Well, comments?
Yeah, are we doing comments?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, sorry to ask more about the stabilization, but my math says it's 757 is the difference from 24 to 25. So is there still like more money to go out, or did we get, or is it
Yeah,
because it's
interest.
September 30th?
Interest.
Oh, all right.
We did well.
I was gonna say, right? Good job.
The bad news is when it doesn't do well, the numbers go down
No,
and people get
that's-
upset. But that's, we all know markets.
Yeah, so, as far as future agenda items, if that's what this
Yeah.
is,
That's what it's for.
I like the idea of talking about how to stabilize for hold harmless.
Sure.
I don't know the answer, but, and I also don't know if, like, instead of putting $1 million
Yeah.
into that, do we start a hold harmless fund for $1 million? I mean, I don't know, whatever, so that could be a topic, and then,
Sure.
it'd be great to also, as a full committee here, have a summary of any, subcommittees, like the joint budget subcommittee. I mean, I watched it online, it was my birthday, so I didn't attend, but, sorry. But I watched it the next day, so, but it'd just be good to hear from you guys that were there, your summary and your feedback, without, you know, all the other members, that were there, who probably have their takes on it as well, so.
I think you guys might, I mean, it's certainly fair game under that agenda item. I mean, the four of you can certainly answer Heather's questions.
And we don't have to do it now, I'm just saying, like,
No,
it's
if-
fine,
if
we're
there's
done
anything-
That's the
now.
point of the, I think that's
I'm
why
saying,
George,
like,
I
next
think that's actually why
meeting,
George
we
put
do
it on the
a
agenda.
summary.
I have a different question that's not related to that. I know you had mentioned it, at the joint budget subcommittee meeting that there is another subcommittee that's based on the benefits renewal.
Yeah,
Is
so
it
that's.
not a subcommittee? You know, I'm just curious, are those
Yeah.
open for people to, not that I wanna sit around and learn about that, but, you know, I don't know, is there an opportunity to learn about the challenges? I know you had said that, you know, we have tremendous loss runs in this town, and it's something to overcome, and rates are gonna go up because of that, and that's a huge deal, and it's a huge number. And I was just curious, I know those meetings go on, are they open, are they closed, are there summaries anywhere?
It's a good question. So that's the Insurance Advisory Committee. It's called the IAC, is the acronym. It's a state law and system of doing health insurance bargaining at the local level, particularly in a unionized environment. So none of our union contracts have bargainable health care. This is another apples and oranges. Other districts, it's in the contract of whatever the department unit is on healthcare. I might get this wrong. It was like 100 years ago or something. I think the town accepted an IAC or 1980s or something like that. I mean, so the IAC's been the formation under state law for many, many years in Franklin. It's made up of the the union leaderships. They choose their own membership, as well as there's a retiree. Those are not posted meetings. They're not generally open to the public. But in the budget narratives each year, Karen usually does a draft of a summary of where we're at with healthcare at the end, for the prospective year. That may be helpful to a lot of people. I will give a quick update. We have, and I'm happy to give these updates too at the meetings, Lauren, just remind me to, but we have looked at every option with the group. We've met way earlier than we normally do. The union representation and the attendance has been probably the best, Karen, we've ever had in our 7 or 8 years together. They've taken a couple of choices off the menu, so we're whittling it down slowly, and we should have some much more better target by December, which is very early. Usually we don't decide until March, April. And the reason why is you want to go out to bid and procurement when you have the lowest loss runs, when you're showing the business community, which is healthcare, that if our loss runs are 90%, hey, if you take us in, you're gonna make a 10% buffer on your own profit margins, or you might be able to make a few bucks up, right? But that's good for the employees because the premiums stay stabilized. So we're working on that. We did have a very good Q1 on our loss runs. They improved significantly. And mainly that's because a lot of the larger expensive cases from January to April, a couple of those have fallen off the rolls. So that's really good news. So they're not paying out those $500,000 claims anymore. So the first quarter has been really good. We have our fingers crossed. We'll be going out to bid soon. That's kind of the quick summary, and I probably will have a little bit more in December at the joint budget.
Ken?
So I wanted to just touch on points both George made at the JBSC and Jamie, you made as well then, as well as tonight. You just kind of raise a question just for consideration. There's clearly a budget deficit starting next year and beyond of what looks to be, actually doesn't really matter what it is, but there's a budget deficit that's expected. There's also, we have a number of people here talking about the financial elements in a relatively empty room. And I'm sure people will watch us on YouTube. No one's dialed in right now. And a lot of the questions that many have and bring up during town council meetings, during the JBSC, so they get touched on here. I'm trying to think of a way to bring this out to the community. And I don't know if that's, and perhaps these are things that have been done before and have worked or not worked, and so they aren't being done. I don't know if it's something like, having finance sessions at the senior center periodically, or just, but, I want us to brainstorm or spend some time thinking about how we can better educate our community about what is happening. Because I believe everyone in this room sees it and has some understanding and recognition of it. It's, not looking for a solution, not looking for an answer, not looking for a number, just, hey, here's the state of the state, state of Franklin. And I just feel like that's an opportunity that we should at the very least consider. So I just wanted to throw that out there as an idea.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with Ken more. I think George is sitting there like, yep.
I mean,
It's true.
George is gonna say, hey guys, just come, like, listen.
He says it all the time, yeah.
He says it all the time. We crammed it, I was able to cram in that one session on the override right before the vote. But I think if you go to that room, it's so hard to find ways to synthesize, as I think all of you know, such complicated, detailed information in a in
The
a cliff
bite-sized,
notes.
easily
In
understandable.
Cliff notes,
Yeah.
and I think that's what George is always, maybe I'll let him do a show, but if people just came here or they watched here, I think maybe the promotion of these meetings, I have no idea. We could certainly do a roadshow, and I think, I've said this at the Joint Budget Subcommittee, I think the engagement has not happened yet in the community. I understand why, because we're focused, the focus has been single-handedly on just an override and kind of a response to June. But I think what people have missed is that what you just said was like heartwarming, right? Like you sit in these meetings, I think everybody feels more educated. I think every meeting that we were in all spring, after every meeting, the audience that was at the council meetings felt, more educated. They felt like questions were answered. They felt like more trust. They felt connected. And as I said at a couple meetings, then we leave this room and we go out and we leave into the parking lot and we take off, and it just seems like it just falls apart. And I know we all go back to our lives, right? Like we all busy. I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing when we get to January and February, we're going to be asked to do more outreach. But I also think that to your point, Ken, it's not always just about an override, right?
Right,
It's really about a lot more stuff.
That's kind of my point,
Yeah.
is, if we wait till we need an override to go out and say, hey, everyone, we need an override, that's a much more difficult situation than trying to bring people along, with, this is where we are today, and here are the challenges. I don't have the answer. I don't know if it's an override. I'm not even necessarily proposing an override right now. But I do think we need to all have our eyes wide open that we have a serious shortfall today that's only going to get worse. And the longer we wait, the worse it will get before we, if we don't address it now. And, my thinking on that is just, I get it. This is probably this and the JBSC are probably the two best venues to get information. But we need to be able to digest it into a bite-sized format where, we're at the library, at the senior center, or whatever, just letting people know, this is what it looks like right now. There's a shortfall of 4 million. We've got, or whatever it is. We need to find a way to solve it. We don't have an answer yet. Would love recommendations, your thoughts, your perspective, and start that part of the conversation. Don't worry about an override. I don't care about that right now. Just what's more important is an understanding of where our community is today. Sorry,
Nope.
I clearly feel strongly about
Maybe
this.
after the meeting, or offline, we can figure out a way of what would that look like, and who would do that. And I think it's probably the most powerful if the superintendent and I are both involved in that type, so it's not one or the other.
I agree.
And,
I don't think it
just
should be.
general outreach. I think I said it at a couple joint budget meetings, there needs to be some sort of a roadshow. People need to engage somehow. I'm not saying it doesn't include me, but it can't all be me. I think the powerful piece of this issue with budgets is citizen to citizen. But, we'll have to figure out what that looks like, and maybe that can be a chore for the joint budget at the next meeting, or offline, we can figure out some ways to do that.
I have a question. Are there rules against what we can, like, for example, there's a lot of Facebook posting, right? If I were to go on before every meeting and say, there is a joint budget subcommittee meeting tonight, are there rules against what I can and cannot post or share?
You can share it all.
I can, okay,
Yep.
there's no restrictions on what I could, okay.
The only thing you can't,
I know, like,
Lauren, do you ever, don't you see what I post?
Well, I'll say finance committee, I don't really wanna do it because I don't wanna I'm gonna turn off the comment. I just wanna be able to say, like, hey, cause there's very vocal people out there in Facebook, right? So I wanna be, I'll be the person to say, hey, finance committee meeting tonight, there's a joint budget subcommittee meeting tonight, here's what's on the agenda, come talk, come listen, come ask your questions. I give everybody, every available format to be able, and I understand what you're saying is there's gotta be alternatives, and maybe, sitting in these meetings for 2 hours is a lot to ask of people on a Wednesday night, I get that too. So maybe there's alternate versions of that, but at least we start there.
Just an aside, there are 11 people out of 33,000, 35,000 watching tonight, right now, on YouTube. We could have perhaps a Facebook, because, I mean, let's face it, that's the mode of information around here. A Facebook Finance Committee page that we,
Only if you monitor it.
yeah, you know.
I think, I
I'm not
gotta be
sure I wanna
honest,
fight
George,
that off.
like, Facebook, I'm sorry, you know my position on this.
Yeah.
It is such garbage, and it's just a place for people to argue and
It's such
fight
garbage,
incessantly.
there's nobody's
I know
challenge.
there's cute dogs and we show pictures of kids, I get all that. This is not a topic. People have to be in person, they have to connect, they have to feel out their neighbors, talk to their fellow neighbors, talk to citizens. Did anyone see the Millis override last night?
Yes.
Got
They
shellacked.
lost by 1381, I believe.
Shellacked.
And there were
So
19.
it lost
They
by
lo- they
8
lost by
votes in
8
May.
last time.
It
They
lost
lost
by
by
8 votes in
19,000.
May.
Yeah.
Okay, and it
By
lost by almost
1381.
1,000 last night, in a higher voter turnout, with more parents invested because they're gonna go out to vote for president.
Million.
It's, and they only went for $1 million, because Brutus lives in Millis.
The first
one only
lost by 18 votes.
I thought
I thought it was 8. It was
18, it's still lost by 1,000 votes.
Still, it's 1,000.
People don't understand,
They don't
I've done these
understand. There's a lot
campaigns
of things
before,
in there.
Amy's done them a lot, I'm just forewarned. You know, people have, citizens have to sacrifice a lot of time out of their life to go talk to other citizens. And it can't be begging people to vote for things and telling them to eat their vegetables. It has to be, you know, what is it, you know, that, you have to listen. You have to, nobody needs to listen to me anymore. People have to listen to you guys and other people in the community that are community members.
Frankly,
You have to talk to each other and build relationships and bonds. This is not easy stuff. This is very, very hard. It is very complicated and very time consuming. September 11th, I said that right out at the joint budget meeting. Like, at some point, I can't organize it all. Lucas can't organize it all. We heard from him at the last meeting. At some point, citizens have to gather together and start to get their ideas. I think we've put enough information out there, by the way. We know what the casualty was last year. We know that there are impacts and feelings that people have, right? I think we've all heard that in the school district especially. But, you know, at some point, we know where the deficit, to Ken's point, is generally around. How we organize that in the community is a community decision, and I think it's much more powerful and potent if citizens do that stuff, instead of, you know, it's not like Lucas and I can come to those things, but I think, you know, it's a lot of time. It's tough, because I know everybody's overscheduled. I know everybody's already on the edge. But you know, obviously I can't, I'm nervous.
Right.
Because we're just about to hit the holidays and so. But Ken, we'll talk about that offline, and maybe we can figure out a little organization in January and February, maybe there's some stuff that folks can do. We can organize in the community, at least in the new year, to get ready for whatever's coming up in the spring, and that'll at least give everybody a fair heads up.
Anybody else? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Shall be so. Thank you.